thanks very much. I'm from Michigan State University and very pleased to be able to talk with such amazing people who have come before me talking about really making cover crops work on their farms. And I'm looking forward to talking a bit about what we've been learning from Michigan State and from Penn State too, because there's been a lot done on designer cover crops here. So I think it'll be quite relevant for all of you, I hope. So I think the most important thing is you've been hearing a lot of options, from leaf mulch to different cover crops, but thinking about your goal. What is your main goal? And then what window you have to grow a cover crop. So what might be some of your goals, those who've tried cover crops or are thinking about? What might you, who's tried some cover crops over here?
Weed pressure.
Weed pressure, number one, that always comes up. What other reasons might you grow cover crops? For rotation, to get that diversity, weeds, and other soil fertility, soil health. Increasing organic matter. So fertility often is actually opposite. You want different types of cover crops for fertility than for soil building. Although soil building is for the long term, and then if you need some immediate nutrient release, particularly if you're an organic farmer, then you need more legumes in there. Can cause pest problems, not as good for weeds, but great for soil fertility. So it depends, and sometimes mixtures allow us to have the best of both worlds. So that's why I want to talk some about them, because not all cover crops are going to give you all those benefits, clearly. So you have to think about your problems first, crop health and soil health. Now we hear a lot about how soil health, and I've been working on soil health for many, many years, back when they used to laugh at us when we brought it up and told us it was called soil quality. But in fact, we're now really understanding it's soil health, and it improves crop health. But not always. Legumes are great for improving soil health eventually. But sometimes they cause pests. Everybody loves legumes. Unfortunately, all the insects and fungi love legumes too, because they provide that nitrogen and that energy, and so everything goes for them. So they're really good, and we'll talk about some combinations of how we can use legumes, but they don't always give you the best protection against root rot, for example. Soil health, obviously, also you have to protect what you've got. Erosion control. You may need different set of cover crops than you need to reduce compaction. Just for a few examples. We heard weeds, number one. So weeds, we have different types of weeds. Perennial weeds, very pernicious, very difficult to control. May need rotation, as we heard earlier, or to diversify so that we are doing different tillage, different types of herbicide combinations, depending on your operation, so that you can get after those perennial weeds. Annual weeds, easier to control in many cases, but very specific types of cover crops can help you control there. Allelopathy. How many people have heard of allelopathy? So a number of people here are aware of that. Vegetable growers should definitely be aware of that. Small seeds like lettuce, very susceptible to allelopathy, to the point where some places people won't grow cereal rye, which is the most notorious for allelopathy. It has chemicals it releases as it decomposes that actually suppress weeds. Great. Also can suppress your crop. So you need to leave enough time to decompose, as we talked about, or we heard about earlier. But I want to talk about some more specifics about that. So you'll notice on the left I have the different benefits from the cover crop and then how it affects the function, the service. But they're all related to biomass, really, in a way, right? So we have biomass that's low nutrition, but it's different quality. Biomass that's high nutrition, nitrogen, energy, like from legumes. Straw, so that's a different function. Roots, a different type of biomass, the below ground biomass. Flowers, I'm not going to talk much about that today, but that shouldn't be forgotten about, that many of the legumes and buckwheat are really important as we're starting to value more than ever our pollinators and our beneficial insects. Beneficial insects need that energy drink. So if we want to get some services from our cover crops to suppress our pests, then we need to give them a little bit of energy and a habitat. So flowers are very important there. Biofumigant, again, a different set of functions. So cover crops provide different services. And I'm going to talk about some good combinations, at least in our area of the world. So roots, I think, have been underappreciated. They're below ground, and we don't always realize what they're giving us. We saw a few examples of some nodules. So hearing again, Like most people think of that we're really much of the world, we're dependent on nitrogen fertilizer factories. I work in Africa and we all talk about that, how there's not enough fertilizer there. But even in Iowa and Indiana and Ohio and Michigan, 50% of the nitrogen is still coming from this, from soybeans and alfalfa. And fertilizer is cycling through this. So we should be understanding this more, and we're starting to get a better understanding of how the legumes play a key role in cycling fertilizer and inorganic N, and also in directly supplying it. These little factories are taking nitrogen we're breathing, and they make it into a form that crops can use, and ultimately animals eat, and that we eat it, right? And then these roots, these are holes. So what kind of cover crop might have made those holes that then other roots are growing through? Oilseed, radish, fodder, radishes. These are really great for, particularly, they've been shown to work where there's wheel track compaction, certain types of compaction, deep compaction, clay soils. They're not as good for the surface compaction that you get, say, in your headlands, and that's really grasses give you better. But the oilseed radish can be unique that way. And probably one of the biggest take-homes is that not all biomass is the same. Some biomass turns into organic matter in the soil, and guess what? It's roots. 60% of this or so is going straight into soil organic matter, building like we heard about. The above stuff is great for releasing nitrogen. So it's also part of organic matter, but it's gone in a bit. We need it. But if we want to build long-term, we need grasses and we need these roots. And this is what? Mycorrhizal fungi. They tangle up the soil, help protect whatever soil carbon we got, and help convert biomass into soil organic matter. And you can see it. If you've pulled up grasses, you know how they have that sticky stuff around them. They're really good at this, at tangling up that and helping build these aggregates. That in soil organic matter is in the middle of those. So you know how they're like the sticky glue in the soil. So this is also a habitat for animals like worms, earthworms, and it's sort of the home for microbes ultimately. So rye, cereal rye, and oats, two of our friends there, have been shown to dramatically increase aggregates. Winter wheat doesn't always as much, although it can be used instead of rye because it has some really good functions and it doesn't have so much allelopathy. So there's trade-offs. No such thing as a free lunch. So cereal rye is good at this. Oats is good at it, and it's particularly good for organic farmers. Why? Why do they use oats more? What do oats happen over the winter?
Winter kill.
Winter kill. So you have a bare field in the spring, which is nice if you don't have herbicides. So we do need to treat them, as we heard earlier, which I thought was a really good point. We have to treat them like a cash crop. You know how to grow cash crops. That's how you're a farmer. So think about how you're going to make sure that they have enough good tilth or soil moisture to seed them into so you can get a good canopy cover. Otherwise, you're going to get some fair bit of weeds out there, particularly for these two. So we have buckwheat on the left, and we have millet. These are really nice, and farmers are starting to use these more and more. They're really quick crops. If it's warm enough, millet it can be an option for you in the summer. Buckwheat's a nice one of the shortest duration, fits into a short window you might have in your growing season. But these two need to be seeded at high rates. They need to have a good start, otherwise you're going to have weed problems. So they're ones that particularly do well if you have a good stand, so use high seeding rates. And it's funny how some people will say, I have a cover crop and somebody else has a cover crop, and you go on their fields, and one, you barely see the cover crop, and maybe mostly weeds, which is okay if they're going to get some quick control on that so that it doesn't go to seed maybe. Another person grows it, and maybe they're using 3 bushels of seed, and the other person's using 1 bushel, and they grow a cover crop, and it's a huge biomass, and they keep talking about, I have too much biomass. It's clogging up my potato harvester. And so people have very different problems depending on how they grow their cover crops. So not all cover crops are the same. So in terms of weed control, this low quality biomass you've been hearing about that has less nitrogen in it can act good as a weed barrier. Otherwise, in this case, we might be feeding the weeds. That wouldn't be good. So we want to use something that's more mature and more of a grass to get some control. Stop weeds from germinating because they don't have the light. They need to have that light to germinate. So here's a couple examples. Martin Diffley Gardens of Eaton in Minnesota. I was very fortunate. When I was getting my master's in Minnesota, I got to live on his farm, an extra house there. And I learned more from him than I think I did in master's in Minnesota in agronomy. So he really was one of the pioneer farmers, and then for a while they were supplying most of the, he and his wife were supplying much of the broccoli for all organic production for Minnesota. Now they go on and teach other people. But they tried a lot of experiments back in the day. And one of them was like, okay, so how can I make sure I've got some cover even during the growing season? Because vegetables, as you know, are quite small at first, may take a while to get going. So he would try different types of, actually, since he had irrigation, irrigating up after weeding a bit. And so he could get a nice start using a little bit of rye in this case, because rye is always so fast. You can't beat rye for how fast it grows. As long as you've got a plan to control it. It gets rank, it gets out of the thing. So here he's got a brassica and then the rye in between. So here he's got rye, hairy vetch, one of my favorite combinations as well. Some people don't like vetch because it can be a problem if you grow much wheat, but as it can, the size of the seed is hard to separate out how it floats versus wheat. But it is really a great combo because it kind of gives you a little bit of legume with that grass. So here's some end of the season control in tomatoes, and a much prettier example from earlier using annual ryegrass right there in between his tomato production. So he is really all about making sure his whole farm is green. So where are you going to fit these in? That's one of the most important things. How are you going to fit them into your operation? Depends on what? Your goals and your windows. So this is from Penn State. It has some nice work, as I said, on suppressing weeds. So you have some options. So red clover, I have put this fall window up here because it's such an important one, at least in Michigan. A lot of people can't take their ground out of production in the summer, so you may have similar experiences here. So you really have only so many options in the fall. So red clover you could have planted back here in February, so that would be frost seeded into wheat or in some sort of small grain, or you can plant it in the fall. You can cereal rye can be planted all the way until early November some years where we are. We've been trying it, pushing the limit. Hairy vetch, most people say you have to plant in August. We've been pushing it to October, mid-October. And partly we find it does better if it's done how? Planted with rye. So it is able to climb up that rye, and it is able to survive the winter better. So you can plant, I would say you could try, especially since it's not quite as severe as we are in Michigan, you could try September, October here. I don't know how many people do that. So oilseed radish, it needs that warm soil. We've tried to fit it into a spring window. We can't do it. So we try it in the fall where we are, more in the end of August, because it needs warm soil, but it is a cool season crop, so it can go in the fall nicely. Right, so another way to put these windows, and these are in some of my cover crop bulletins, which you can download from Michigan State, and I've got some here with me. So you don't have to write all this down. So this is another way of looking at that windows again. Red clover into wheat, wheat harvest, red clover keeps growing. We keep talking about this one because red clover can then go for an entire season, and then we terminate it next March. So you can really get either a hay crop or a really good legume shot if that's what you need to rehabilitate your soil. Summer, got lots of options in the summer, but as I said, your cash crops are usually then. But I'll show a few of them. And then winter, field pea is something we've been trying more lately. Expensive, but really a good way to get, again, some nice legume in. But we always mix it with the grass to make it cheaper. So here is another way to look at it, that you have your marketing crop one year, another year. How many times do we need to do this? Well, I think of it as often to think about the rule of threes in terms of how many species we mix together, and in terms of how many over about 4 years. You want to have at least 3 soil building times as the absolute minimum. So you want to have these times when you're building the soil, and then obviously exploiting it. That's what we do in agriculture. Some people say, well, why are you removing so much nutrients? Well, that's what you have to do. It's just a cost of business, so we need to replenish it, and not just with fertilizers. We need to replenish with the carbon that goes with the fertilizers so that they can be used efficiently. So, and also we can use other types of inputs more efficiently if we are using our biology too. So enough diversification, I feel a rule of 3 works. And so how do we get to that? Another way to look at, again, these windows, fall planting windows, only a few things can be interseeded or planted with wheat. And that's because not everything loves shade. Plants tend to need to photosynthesize. They like the sun. But there's a few things that originally were pastures, like red clover and annual ryegrass. They are compatible with another plant. They're adapted evolutionarily over tens of thousands of years to being in a pasture. They can survive shade. They do well. So that's why red clover is so good at being grown under wheat or interseeded with wheat or under corn even. And same with annual ryegrass. Although that one can get away from you, you should have a plan to control it. Red clover and hairy vetch, so those are both can be frost seeded. And then buckwheat is really, it's short, it's a very short season, but so you can fit it into a window if you have a window after a vegetable, for example. So you want to design it, you want to think about your window, which is adapted to that area and season, and get high quality seed, investing in seed. This is one of the ways I cheat a little bit. I tell people, why not try for something like alfalfa, oriental mustard, field peas, soybeans as a cover crop? Why? Why am I saying these things? They're cheap because they're cash crops too. So red clover, a lot of people, well, and the other way to be cheap, of course, is to produce your own seed. Cereal rye is so easy that a lot of people will just let a little bit of it go to seed and they harvest that seed and they have their own things. But buying it once in a while to make sure it's high quality and then producing your own, that's one strategy. Another one is to buy it, but buy it as a cash crop. So alfalfa, there's some really cheap varieties out there that can be used. And in Michigan, that's a lot of organic growers use alfalfa. And then having a plan to terminate. You know, this is an intensively grown crop. Think about how you're going to seed it and then how you're going to kill it. So, cool season species is, again, oats has the advantage in that winter kills, but it's a disadvantage if you don't want to leave the spring to allow weeds to grow then. But if you want to get an early crop in, it's very good. Cereal rye, we've done all sorts of little experiments trying to get seed to germinate faster. And cereal rye, we could not trick it into, as soon as it's above 32, as soon as it gets above freezing, it starts germinating. It's amazing. Hairy vetch, if you pre-soak it, you prime it, pre-soak it in water and then dry it, it will be faster. But cereal rye, you can't get it to be faster. Some farmers, where I am, put fertilizer with it, thinking they can get it to jump up and get going in the fall. But we've shown that doesn't work. Cereal rye, you just spread it out there and it gets going. Hairy vetch is very similar, although, you can, as I said, priming it will make it a little bit faster, but just a day or two. Oilseed radish, we've been working on how to help it get going because it just has that fall window to produce. And especially where we are, we're really trying to use that fall window well. So if you have summer, then of course you've got lots of options. Cowpea is a little expensive because the seed has to be, we can't produce seed where we are, so we have to ship it in, and it's heavy because it's a legume, so it's a big seed. So it's a great crop, I think, cover crop, but it's very expensive. So we've been trying Cordylaria or sun hemp recently. Sudan grass is, probably the best. It can produce 50% more biomass than anything else in the summer to improve your soil organic matter. But it's not going to improve your nitrogen. It may tie it up for a while, unless you do what? Yeah?
Is sun hemp and Sudan grass the same?
No, they can be grown together. Sun hemp, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, is Cordylaria. So that is a legume. It can grow with Sudan. Sudan grass, or Sudex is a version, is a grass. Okay? Buckwheat, rapid growth there. I'll get to the Cordylaria in a minute there. I don't want to skip over your question. So I just want to review about grasses. Always think about them as pluses and minuses. There's no silver bullet. They each have advantages and disadvantages. And this, again, is in our, on our website. Annual ryegrass is not recommended by many extension educators in Michigan because it can become weedy. But if you have a plan, the right herbicide or the right way to control it, then I think it's really nice. It's been shown to really reduce compaction. How many people have tried annual ryegrass? So what's been your experience with it?
Well, we interseeded it, tied up nitrogen in the brassicas, but otherwise, it's not a weed.
Yeah. Other people, do you like it? So it has its fans for sure, so it should not be forgotten. It is also something you can underseed into corn. It's one of the few things you can do that, or broccoli. Oats, it really mellows the soil. Oats is really nice for winter kills, so it traditionally was grown with sweet clover back in the day, and it still is a very nice mix with sweet clover, which is this tall clover. Cereal rye, as I said, is the only thing you could plant in October or November. One time a grower asked me he was a sugar beet grower, what he could plant in November and then turn in February. So what do you think I told him? Snow mold. Nothing grows then, sorry, But if he's willing to wait till March or April, then maybe cereal rye. But people do want an impossible thing. Michigan, where we are, I mean, it's too cold in the winter to grow something unless you get it going in early November, before hunting season. So you got to get it in the ground. We're pushing the window on that, but still, we got to be realistic. Okay, wheat, winter wheat. Is, especially if you're worried about lilipathy wheat, can be very good. Sudan grass, lots of biomass, as I said. And also it has some lilipathy, reduces weeds for you. It can choke out a lot of weeds. So this is, as I said, rye and hairy vetch, nicely growing up there, my top pick, always. This one, mixture works well. Okay, so as I said, the sun hemp and cordylaria with different types of grasses. It's really can be a nice mixture there, and it is claimed in the literature, although I've not seen it, except I guess seeing is believing, that cows can graze this sun hemp, so it could be grazed as well. Sudex, as again, it can be grown with cowpea, or it can be grown with cordylaria or sun hemp, same thing. This one, Sudex, you cannot build biomass better than with this one, if you have a summer window that you want to rehabilitate a soil. Alfalfa, if you've got a couple of years, or Sudex if you've just got a summer to rebuild a site. So legumes are really important, even though they could possibly, as I said, if you are using a lot of compost already, and you may need to back off on them. You can't be just always putting legumes out there. We should either mix them with the grass, because too much of a legume can be too much of a good thing. It can attract different problems, as you'll see in a minute. But it's important to mix things up, and I think legumes are very critical in terms of their roots have been shown to build organic matter. We used to think legumes were good at soil fertility, but they didn't build organic matter. But they do eventually, because they do have these nice roots. And speaking of roots, so we have oilseed radish on the right. There we've got it with manure. On the left, without manure. So again, about this growing a good oilseed radish crop. But think about what's below ground. So we've got oilseed radish, or fodder radish is similar as this nice big taproot, give you nice aeration of your soil, that your cash crop can use those holes, particularly where there's been wheel traffic. And then we've got oriental mustard, which again is a condiment, so pretty cheap to buy as a cash crop because it's grown for the mustard seed. And then rapeseed, also fairly cheap. So think about what's below ground. If you want to build up improve your, shift your soil microorganisms, perhaps reduce some root rots, then I would do this. If you have a compaction issue, then I would use oilseed radish, or if you want livestock. Okay, so which cover crops families? So basically, remember that your legumes come with both bacteria. Either you have to inoculate if you don't grow legumes very often, or they use, it kind of increases bacteria rhizobium from the soil. It sort of acts as its own improver, the amount of rhizobium there, and mycorrhizae. Brassicas, so that's your oilseed radish, your mustards, all of these don't have mycorrhizal fungi. They're interesting that way. So they also are resistant to a lot of fungi, and they even kill some nematodes. So they kind of shift things up. So if you wanted to shift your microbes and kind of give it a restart, I think it's important to occasionally use that, but maybe not more than once every couple of years. So these are different families that we can combine. Other ways, when you start doing mixtures, you should think about is complementary heights, different growth periods. Is it a warm or is it a cool season? when you're using that combination. So, kind of a summary slide here. We've got pluses, legumes can add nitrogen, soil building, but we have to be careful of scab potential and root rots with too much legume. Mixtures then are one way to address this. Clover or a vetch with a wheat, rye, and oats. This is just a combination that's been used for many years and it's very reliable. But a lot of times I see what's being sold for mixtures is 10, 15 species, cocktails. Has anyone tried these? Okay, what was your experience? How many species came up? Did you go out and look at it after you planted?
Pretty decently came up.
Yeah, you got a good.
I got the NRCS, give me the mixture.
Yep, okay, so NRCS.
NRCS.
Yeah. Well, we often find that rye or wheat will dominate those mixtures.
Well, I didn't put
That didn't have rye in it. Well, that was,
in the summer.
okay,
The summer planting.
yeah,
It had some sunflowers, it had some rake.
yeah,
I threw some turnips, some radishes in, some crispin clover.
Yeah.
But I didn't come in and broadcast the rye on until the fall,
okay,
because the majority of that stuff had winter killed down.
yeah. So,
Where I'm at in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, it was beginning of November, I just wanted to broadcast rye over the top.
okay, so you used a cocktail and then you put in rye. So you're getting a lot of diversity there. And I think that's what the mixtures can be great for. But we should also, you can make your own mixtures too, and at least have 3 species there, and that can give you a lot of the diversity. Because often if you put 10 species, only a couple of them survive. So this one, again, is one we're just putting up on the website recently. We're just basically saying that if you're trying to do weed control, and whether you are looking for something that winter kills or not, then this will kind of get you in a decision tree to decide which combination you might want to use. So one thing I wanted to leave with you is very important is like seeding rate calculations. If you're trying to do your own mixtures, don't just take the seeds and divide it by however many species. You have 4 species, divide each seeding rate by 4, which is recommended some places. But the problem is that legume seeds, you need to have enough there or they won't have a chance. Don't even bother to do it unless you're willing to do almost the full rate. Okay? So it's like a sole crop, but you have to do it. But by grasses, you can do that. We have used much higher rates for them. So let me give you an example here. So annual ryegrass, so it's usually should be 20 pounds an acre. We've got 4 species mixture, so we divide it by 4 and we get 5 pounds. Rye and oats, we have around 2 bushels, 100 pounds, so 25 pounds each. But we don't want rye and oats to dominate, so we cut it back to 20 pounds each of seeds. Then the crimson clover, we get it down to 10. I know some farmers use 5, but I start to wonder, will there be any crimson clover there at that case? So there's a good calculator that uses a lot of these hints. And then Charlie White and others, people have started to really learn a lot about this too. So there's starting to be some resources out there for you on designing your own mixtures. I think the main thing here is to think about, again, in your termination, what is your goal? So on the left, we've got a conventional flail mower that shreds it. On the right, more of a stalk chopper. So which one is going to really let you release your nitrogen, and which one's going to give you a little bit more weed control before?
Flail.
So the flail is really going to shred it and release nutrients fast, and then a stalk chopper, something that leaves big pieces on the ground, is going to be a slower release. So you have to have a plan, and we've tried some of these roller crimpers at Michigan too. Especially if you're not using herbicides, this can be an approach, but I think we've heard about 1 year, in fact the first year it worked beautiful. Second year, unfortunately, we didn't get quite to the maturity right. Third year, we started to get a lot of escapes, weeds got through it. Fourth year didn't work. So 1 out of 4 years we did great, so that's not so good. But it's gotten better, but I still remember those first 4 years, so it's just a warning that this takes a lot to learn how to work. So this allelopathy, as I mentioned, we really have to be careful that before small-seeded crops like lettuce. And we always want to prevent a green bridge. You don't want to have it decomposing while you then plant a seed into it. That's what we mean by green bridge. Yeah.
Put an allopathic crop in, how many years you gotta wait before you?
No, not years, a week or two. Let it decompose. Okay, especially if you're going to seedlings, transplants, or potato tubers, you should be pretty safe. I know in the spring we're all in a hurry, but do wait a week, okay? Because that lets the green material decompose, release nutrients, and not, otherwise you have a lot of fungi on there helping decompose it, and you put your young seedling in there, or your seeds, and then some saprophytes, some fungi will jump right to those seedlings. So prevent that by just waiting a little bit. And so if you can't wait, what can you do? Grow something that winter kills. You know, don't try and do some sort of roller crimping or a flail mower and then incorporate it and then go and plant, because you really will have a disaster. I think I have one example of that. So in summary, make a plan, choose a window, and just as a couple warnings on top there, we've got cutworm damage, so after sweet clover. So this legume again didn't help anything because unfortunately it attracted some cutworms. But after cereal rye, waiting a week, we've got some nice seedlings started. And there's some nice resource there. The Building Soils book kind of tells you, that was been mentioned earlier as a good resource, because it will tell you which cover crops bring in which beneficials and which pests too. Okay, that's on the SARE website. And finally, I do want to leave you with, I think, some of the better cover crop resources from Penn State. And of course, obviously, I hope you'll look at Michigan State website too. I think we're getting time for,
Yeah,
we were about 5 minutes over at the beginning, so
Yeah, but
we're really needing to move on. Okay, I will be around afterwards if anyone has any questions.
okay. Thank you.